My name is Harper. I'm 34 years old. And I never imagined I'd be sitting in a courtroom watching my own parents try to take everything I'd built. Across the room, my mother Diane stared at me with ice-cold eyes while my father Garrett wore a smirk that made my stomach turn. The lawsuit papers in front of the judge claimed I owed them everything, literally everything, my entire tech company fortune worth $800 million. They wanted half of it, $240 million, plus damages for the emotional distress they claimed I'd caused them. The absurdity of it should have been laughable, but nothing about this moment was funny. I'd spent 18 months fighting this nightmare, 18 months of depositions and media attacks and sleepless nights, and now we were finally here. But they had no idea what evidence I'd brought today. Before we dive into how I got here, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. And if you've ever dealt with toxic family dynamics, hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. Make sure to subscribe because this story gets intense, and you won't want to miss what happens when the judge hears the truth. Trust me, the next part will show you exactly how a perfect daughter becomes a defendant in her own parents' greed. Now let me take you back to where this all began. Growing up in suburban Massachusetts, I was what everyone called the golden child. My parents, Diane and Garrett Monroe, ran a small but successful real estate business, and from the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. I excelled at absolutely everything they put in front of me. Straight A's from kindergarten through high school. First place at regional science fairs 3 years running. Piano competitions where I'd bring home trophies that my mother would display in our living room like artifacts in a museum. My parents bragged about me constantly to neighbors, to friends, to anyone who would listen. Diane would corner people at the grocery store to tell them about my latest achievement, and Garrett would bring up my test scores at his real estate client meetings. But what those people didn't see was what happened behind our closed doors, in the quiet moments when there was no audience to perform for. From the time I was 5 years old, I learned that love in our house came with conditions attached. Every A grade was celebrated with hugs and praise. But the one time I brought home a B+ in 7th grade math, my mother didn't speak to me for 2 days. Not a punishment, she announced. Just cold silence that made me feel like I'd committed an unforgivable sin. My father would sit at the dinner table and ask me what I'd accomplished that week, and if my answer wasn't impressive enough, I could see the disappointment cloud his face. I started keeping a journal when I was 10, writing down every achievement, every award, every moment of excellence, because I needed proof that I was worthy of their affection. I still have those journals, filled with the anxious handwriting of a child trying desperately to earn love that should have been freely given. My younger brother Finn was 15 when I left for college, and watching how differently our parents treated him was like looking into a funhouse mirror of family dynamics. Finn could fail tests, skip homework, quit activities halfway through, and our parents would just laugh it off as boys being boys. He received money freely for video games and hanging out with friends, while I had to justify every dollar I needed for school supplies. Don't get me wrong, I never blamed Finn for this. He was trapped in his own cage, just a different kind. He was loved without conditions but also without expectations, which meant our parents never pushed him to become anything. I was expected to be perfect, to be exceptional, to be someone they could show off and eventually profit from. Neither role was healthy, but at the time, I thought being the golden child meant I was special. I didn't realize I was just a better investment. The first crack in the illusion came when I had to choose a college. I'd been accepted to MIT, Stanford, and Carnegie Mellon, all with full scholarships because my grades and test scores were that good. MIT was my dream, the best computer science program in the country, and I'd worked my entire childhood for this moment. But my parents wanted me to attend the state school 30 minutes from our house. They claimed it was about not wasting a scholarship so far away, about staying close to family, about being practical. But I heard what they weren't saying, that they couldn't control me from across the country, couldn't monitor my choices, couldn't keep me in the role they'd created for me. We had our first major fight about this. Diane cried, the manipulative kind of tears that were designed to make me feel guilty, and she said I was breaking her heart by choosing to leave. Garrett gave me the silent treatment for 3 weeks, acting like I'd betrayed him personally. But I stood firm, because even at 18, some part of me knew that if I didn't leave then, I never would. They didn't help me move into my dorm at MIT. They claimed they were too hurt by my decision, too wounded that I'd chosen a school so far away. I drove myself to Boston in my beat-up Honda Civic that I'd bought with money from working at the local library, all my belongings crammed into the back seat and trunk. My roommate Saskia's parents helped me carry my boxes up 4 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken, and I remember standing in that tiny dorm room afterward, feeling both liberated and completely alone. That was the moment I first allowed myself to think that maybe, just maybe, something was wrong with the way my parents loved me. MIT was a revelation. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who were brilliant and driven, and nobody was grading my worth based on how well I performed for them. My roommate Saskia became my closest friend within the first month. She was from California, effortlessly confident in a way I'd never been, and she noticed immediately how anxious I became whenever my parents called. They called every Sunday evening like clockwork, but they never asked how I was feeling, or if I was happy, or whether I was making friends. Instead, they interrogated me about my classes, my projects, my internship prospects. Diane would ask detailed questions about which professors liked me best and whether I'd networked with anyone important. Garrett wanted to know if I was making connections that could turn into job opportunities. They were investing time in their investment, making sure I was on track to provide the return they expected. The summer after my freshman year, I landed an internship at a tech startup in Boston that paid $15,000 for 3 months of work. I was so proud of myself, felt so adult and capable earning real money. But when I told my parents, their first response wasn't congratulations. Garrett said they were struggling with Finn's private school tuition and could really use some help. I felt that old familiar guilt creep in, the sense that I owed them for everything they'd done for me. So I sent them $7,000, half my entire summer earnings, and kept the rest for textbooks and expenses. I told myself I was being a good daughter, helping my family in their time of need. It didn't occur to me until years later that they'd never actually struggled financially. They just saw an opportunity to take my money and knew exactly which emotional buttons to push. Sophomore year changed everything. I created my first successful app, a campus food delivery optimization program that won the University Innovation Prize and came with $25,000. This was real money, money that could change my immediate future, and I was so excited I could barely sleep. My parents suddenly became very interested in visiting me. They drove up to Boston for the first time since I'd started school, took me to a nice dinner, acted loving and proud in a way that felt almost normal. But over dessert, Garrett started talking about how we should invest the prize money wisely, together, as a family. He used the word family like a weapon, implying that keeping the money for myself would be selfish. I felt the old instincts kick in, the desire to please them and make them proud. But something new had developed in me at MIT, a spine I didn't know I had. I opened a separate bank account they didn't know about, deposited $10,000 there, and told them I'd only won $15,000 total. It was the first time I'd lied to them, and I felt terrible about it for weeks. But I also felt something else, something that tasted like freedom. Junior year brought the betrayal that would permanently destroy whatever was left of our relationship. I'd been working on a groundbreaking algorithm for data encryption, spending every spare moment in the computer lab, surviving on coffee and determination. My professor thought it was good enough to patent, that it could actually be commercially valuable someday. I was thrilled, terrified, and proud all at once. Over winter break, I went home and told my parents everything. I explained the algorithm, how it worked, what it could mean for cybersecurity. I showed them my documentation, walked them through the patent process I was about to start. They seemed supportive, asked intelligent questions, told me how proud they were. I thought I was sharing my success with people who loved me. I was actually giving thieves the blueprint for their crime. I returned to MIT in January, threw myself back into perfecting the algorithm and preparing the patent application. In March, I received a phone call that changed my life. A patent lawyer informed me that someone had already filed an application for my algorithm. Not someone, my parents. Diane and Garrett Monroe had used every piece of information I'd shared with them over winter break to file a patent for my own creation. I was listed in the application as a research assistant, a subordinate who'd helped develop their invention. I drove home that day, 4 hours of tears and disbelief, my hands shaking so badly I had to pull over twice. When I confronted them in our living room, they were casual, almost annoyed that I was making such a fuss. Diane actually said the words "I'll never forget, what's yours is ours, we're family." Garrett was even more direct. "We raised you, fed you, clothed you. This is payback." That word, payback, like my childhood, had been a loan with interest due. The legal battle to reclaim my own intellectual property lasted 8 months and cost me $40,000 in legal fees. I worked part-time jobs on top of my full course load, ate ramen noodles for every single meal, skipped social events to save money for lawyers. My university backed me up with documentation, lab records, witness statements from professors and classmates who'd seen me develop the algorithm. Eventually, I won. The court ruled that the patent rights belonged to me, that my parents had attempted to steal my intellectual property. You'd think that would be the end of it, that they'd apologize and we'd try to move forward. Instead, they played the victims. They told everyone who would listen that I'd sued my own family, that I'd attacked the people who raised me over a simple misunderstanding. Extended family members called me selfish and ungrateful. Old family friends stopped speaking to me. My parents didn't attend my graduation ceremony because, as Diane told my aunt, they couldn't support someone who'd attacked them so viciously. I graduated with highest honors, walked across that stage to receive my diploma, and the seats where my parents should have been sitting were empty. After graduation, I moved to San Francisco and joined an established tech firm called Cipher Dynamics. My starting salary was $95,000, which felt like an absolute fortune after 4 years of student poverty. I rented a tiny studio apartment in the Mission District where I could hear my neighbors through the walls, and the rent ate up half my paycheck, but it was mine. I'd cut off all contact with my parents after graduation, blocked their phone numbers and email addresses, and tried to build a life without them. For 6 months, there was blessed silence. Then my mother started leaving voicemails on my work phone, which she must have gotten from calling Cipher Dynamics and charming the receptionist. The messages were always the same tone. "We miss you. Family is forever. Let's move past this unpleasantness." Never an apology, never an acknowledgement that they'd done anything wrong, just an expectation that I would forgive and forget, because that's what good daughters do. I deleted every message without listening to the end. At Cipher Dynamics, I was promoted rapidly, from junior developer to senior developer to team lead within 2 years. I worked 80-hour weeks, saved every penny I could, and invested wisely in index funds and tech stocks. But my real work happened in the evenings and on weekends, when I'd go home to my apartment and work on my own project. I was developing something I called Sentinel, a revolutionary cybersecurity platform built on the algorithm I'd fought my parents to keep. My college friend Saskia had moved to San Francisco too, working in marketing at a startup, and when I told her about Sentinel, she immediately wanted in. She became my business partner, bringing marketing genius to my technical skills. Devin, my old study partner from MIT, joined as Chief Technology Officer. These people believed in me when my own family had tried to rob me. That meant everything. When I was 25, I left Cipher Dynamics to work on Sentinel full-time. We secured $2 million in seed funding from a venture capital firm, and suddenly my side project became a real company with real employees and real stakes. I worked 100-hour weeks from a cramped office space in Soma, sleeping on the office couch more nights than I slept in my apartment. I ate ramen by choice now instead of necessity, funneling every dollar back into the company. The first year was brutal, the kind of brutal that tests whether you actually want what you think you want. But Sentinel worked. Our cybersecurity platform was genuinely innovative, genuinely needed, and companies started signing contracts. Somehow, my parents heard about this. Maybe they were Googling my name, or maybe someone from our hometown saw an article and told them. Garrett called from a number I didn't have blocked, and when I stupidly answered, he said they wanted to invest in my company and be involved in its growth. I laughed, actually laughed out loud, and told him they'd stolen from me once and would never get another chance. Then I hung up and blocked that number too. Sentinel grew faster than any of us had imagined possible. By the time I was 26, we had Fortune 500 companies as clients, businesses that needed cutting-edge security solutions and were willing to pay premium prices for them. Our company valuation hit $50 million in our second year of operation. I started appearing in tech publications, Forbes 30 Under 30, TechCrunch profiles about the woman revolutionizing cybersecurity. My face was on magazine covers at airport newsstands. This was when my parents really came out of the woodwork. Extended family members I hadn't heard from in years started reaching out. My Aunt Lorraine sent a Facebook message saying my mother had seen me in Forbes and was so proud of me. My cousin Bethany called to say my dad was telling everyone about my success. The audacity of it made me furious. They'd tried to steal from me. They'd made me sue them to keep what was mine. They hadn't spoken to me in years. But now that I was successful and visible, they wanted to claim me again. They'd even started telling people in our hometown that they'd helped fund my company. A complete fabrication that spread through small-town gossip networks. I hired a publicist and released a statement setting the record straight. I built this company alone, without family support or family money. My parents were furious at being publicly corrected, but I was done protecting their feelings. My personal life became non-existent during these years of building Sentinel. I dated occasionally, went on apps and met people for coffee or dinner, but nothing ever got serious. How could it? I had trust issues that went bone deep after my family's betrayal, and I was working so obsessively that I barely had time to sleep, let alone maintain a relationship. I started therapy when I was 27, finally admitting that I needed help processing everything that had happened. My therapist helped me understand the narcissistic family dynamics I'd grown up in, the golden child and scapegoat roles, the conditional love and emotional manipulation. I grieved in those therapy sessions, not for the parents I'd lost, but for the parents I'd never actually had. The ones who would have loved me without keeping score. When I was 28, Sentinel went public. The IPO was covered by every major business publication, and our company valuation hit $800 million. My personal net worth, since I owned 59% of the company's stock, reached $470 million. Overnight, I became one of the richest self-made women in tech. The media requests were overwhelming, the speaking invitations constant, the attention surreal. I bought a house in Palo Alto, modest by billionaire standards but a mansion compared to my studio apartment. I donated $50 million to MIT to establish a scholarship fund for students from difficult family situations. I was finally secure, finally successful, finally independent. I actually remember thinking to myself, they can't hurt me anymore. I should have known better. The wedding invitation arrived on thick cream cardstock, formal and elegant, announcing that my brother Finn was marrying his girlfriend Colette. It avoided Finn along with my parents for years, and seeing his name in that careful calligraphy made me feel something I'd tried to suppress, the loss of my brother. Inside, the invitation was a handwritten note on smaller matching stationery. I know things are complicated, but you're my sister and I want you there. Please come. I miss you. His handwriting was the same as I remembered from when we were kids. And that note broke through defenses I'd spent years building. I was conflicted in a way that felt physically painful. My therapist warned me it might be a trap. Saskia and Devin both said don't go. But guilt and that stubborn hope for family won out. Maybe Finn was different. Maybe he'd grown up. Maybe this could be a chance to have at least one family member in my life. I RSVP'd yes, but with conditions. I would attend the ceremony only, and skip the reception. I hired a security detail because it felt necessary even if it seemed paranoid. I booked my own hotel room, rented my own car, maintained complete independence. I shopped for a wedding gift, settling on a $5,000 check that felt generous but not showy. I prepared myself emotionally for seeing my parents again. Rehearsed how I'd respond if they tried to talk to me. Built up walls I hoped would hold. The wedding was in our hometown at a small church I'd attended as a child. I arrived late deliberately and sat in the back row where I could leave quickly if needed. There were about 75 guests, and my parents sat in the front with Finn, so they didn't see me initially. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Colette looked radiant. Finn looked happy. And for a moment I felt an unexpected surge of emotion watching my baby brother get married. Had grown up into a man, and I'd missed it. Maybe, I thought, maybe family healing was possible. My plan to leave immediately after the ceremony fell apart when Finn spotted me. He rushed over before I could escape, and there were genuine tears in his eyes when he begged me to stay for the reception, just for 1 hour. My defenses crumbled, because this was Finn. My brother who I'd protected and played with and loved before everything got complicated. He introduced me to Colette, who was warm and friendly and said Finn talked about me constantly. Maybe I'd been wrong to avoid him too. Maybe this could work. Then my parents found me. Diane approached first with tears streaming down her face, in front of all the wedding guests who were watching this family reunion. My baby. I've missed you so much, she said loud enough for people nearby to hear. Garrett joined us, wrapped his arms around both of us, and someone shouted for a family photo. I was trapped in their embrace while cameras flashed, guests cooing about how sweet it was to see family reunited. My skin was crawling, but I stayed polite because this was Finn's day and I wouldn't ruin it. But I saw the performance in my parents' eyes, the calculation behind Diane's tears. This wasn't real. After the photos, Diane pulled me aside to what she called a quiet room where we could catch up properly. Garrett followed, and suddenly I was alone with both of them, door closed, their masks dropping so fast it was like watching actors step off stage. Diane's tears vanished instantly. Her voice went cold and businesslike. "We need to talk about money," she said. They claimed they were in financial trouble, bad investments, and an underwater mortgage, and crushing debt. "We raised you and sacrificed everything for you," Garrett said, "and now we need help." The amount they requested was $2 million. They called it a loan, promised they'd pay me back. But I knew better. I said no. Just one word, calm and firm and final. No. That's when I saw the rage. Diane's face transformed into something ugly. All pretense of motherly love burning away. "After everything we gave you," she hissed. Garrett joined in. "You owe us for 18 years of food and shelter." I told them parents aren't supposed to charge their children rent retroactively. I stood up to leave, but Garrett actually blocked the door. "If you want help family voluntarily," he said, "we'll make you." Diane's threat was even clearer. "We'll sue for what's rightfully ours." I laughed because it seemed absurd. The idea that they could sue me for being successful. Then Garrett told me they had lawyers who said they had a case, who told them they could claim parental reimbursement and emotional damages and compensation for their contribution to my success. I looked at these people who'd raised me and saw nothing familiar, nothing loving, nothing redeemable. "Then I'll see you in court," I said, and pushed past Garrett to find Finn. I said a brief goodbye, told him to ask his parents what happened, and drove back to California that same night. I didn't stop driving except for gas until I was back in my own house, safe behind locked doors, shaking with adrenaline and grief. 3 months later, the lawsuit was filed, not for $2 million like they'd demanded at the wedding, but for $240 million, 50% of my net worth, plus additional damages for the emotional distress they claimed I'd caused them. The legal theory was insane. That my success directly resulted from their investment in raising me. That they deserved returns on that investment, like shareholders in a company. But they'd actually found a lawyer willing to take the case, and suddenly my nightmare was real. My legal team at the prestigious firm Whitmore and Associates was headed by Judith Whitmore, a 62-year-old veteran litigator who'd seen everything in her decades practicing law. When she first read the lawsuit, she called me personally and said, "This is one of the most outrageous cases I've encountered, but we have to take it seriously." My parents had hired an aggressive lawyer named Preston Mallory, known for taking questionable cases and seeking media attention. Local news in Massachusetts picked up the story immediately. "Parents sue successful tech entrepreneur daughter" became a headline that spread across social media. The narrative painted me as an ungrateful child who'd abandoned her struggling parents, while they were portrayed as loving people who just wanted acknowledgement from the daughter they'd sacrificed everything to raise. The legal strategy my parents pursued was calculated and vicious. They filed in Massachusetts, where they still lived, forcing me to fight on their home turf. They claimed they'd invested $300,000 in raising me and itemized every childhood expense they could think of. Food costs, housing expenses, educational materials, extracurricular activities. They demanded a return on this investment based on my current wealth, using formulas that would be laughable if they weren't part of an actual lawsuit. They added emotional distress claims, saying it abandoned them in their time of need and caused them genuine psychological harm. They painted themselves as devoted parents betrayed by a cold, calculating daughter who valued money over family. The media circus that developed over the next several months was brutal. The story went viral on social media, and public opinion divided sharply. Some people sided with my parents, arguing that children have an obligation to help their struggling parents, that family loyalty matters more than money. Others were outraged, recognizing this as exploitation, and saying parents aren't investors, and children aren't commodities. My company's stock price actually dipped on the negative publicity, and our board of directors expressed concern about the reputational damage. I gave one press statement through my publicist, outlining the patent theft and years of manipulation. But my parents had a counter-narrative ready for everything I said. Diane gave tearful interviews to local television stations, playing the wounded mother perfectly. "We just want our daughter back," she'd say while crying. "The money doesn't matter. We just want to be a family again." This was a blatant lie, since the lawsuit specifically demanded exact dollar amounts, but the performance was convincing enough that people believed her. Garrett played the wounded father, showing reporters my childhood bedroom that they'd kept exactly as I'd left it, like a shrine to the daughter they claimed to miss so desperately. They displayed my trophies and awards like museum pieces, telling sob stories about how proud they were and how much it hurt that I wouldn't acknowledge them. The manipulative narrative was effective because my parents were good at manipulation. They'd had decades of practice on me. The discovery phase of the lawsuit was invasive in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had to provide financial records, business documents, personal emails, everything about my life laid bare for examination. My parents provided their itemized childhood expenses, which included things like birthday presents, Christmas gifts, family vacations, things that normal parents consider gifts, but they wanted to charge me for retroactively. They even included a calculation for parental labor hours, claiming they'd spent an average of 4 hours per day on childcare activities, and charging me $50 per hour for this time over 18 years. The mathematics was absurd, but they'd somehow documented it with charts and spreadsheets. During my deposition, Preston Mallory questioned me for 6 brutal hours. "Isn't it true you've become greedy since building your company?" he asked. "Don't you think you owe your parents something for your very existence? How can you sleep at night knowing your parents are struggling while you live in luxury?" I remained calm and factual, refused to take the bait, and stated plainly what they'd done: the patent theft, the manipulation, the conditional love. But he twisted everything I said, trying to make me sound cold and heartless. When Judith deposed my parents separately, their performances were telling. Diane broke down crying multiple times, playing the victim beautifully, but contradicting herself repeatedly about the financial claims. At one point, she said they were destitute, then later mentioned their rental properties and retirement accounts. Garrett was more calculated but made critical mistakes. He admitted they'd been angry when I succeeded without including them, revealed his sense of entitlement by saying she wouldn't exist without us, like my existence meant they owned my achievements. These depositions gave us ammunition, but they also showed how far my parents were willing to go. The situation with Finn became complicated when both sides subpoenaed him as a witness. My parents wanted him to testify that I'd always been cold and distant, while my legal team wanted him to testify about the family dysfunction. Finn reached out to meet me secretly at a coffee shop in Connecticut, halfway between Massachusetts and California. It was the first real conversation we'd had in years. He apologized for the wedding ambush, saying he genuinely hadn't known what our parents were planning. He admitted he'd been manipulated his whole life too, just differently. "They treated you like an investment and treated me like I was incompetent, and neither role was healthy." Finn was in therapy now, finally seeing the dysfunction clearly. Our parents were pressuring him to lie for them, but he refused. He'd tell the truth even if it hurt them. While the legal battle ground on, I hired a private investigator named Reed Cooper to dig into my parents' real financial situation. What he discovered was damning. They weren't struggling at all. They'd been lying about their poverty. They owned 3 rental properties worth a combined $1.2 million. Garrett's real estate business was profitable. They'd retired early and were living comfortably on rental income and investments. The lawsuit wasn't about need, it was pure greed. Reed also uncovered emails between my parents and the various lawyers they'd consulted before finding Preston. Most attorneys had refused to take the case as frivolous, but the emails showed my parents calculating potential payouts. "If we get even 10%, that's $40 million. They'd been planning this since my company went public. The wedding reconciliation had been entirely strategic. The 18 months between filing and trial were the worst of my life. The stress affected my health with insomnia, weight loss, and constant anxiety. My company performance suffered because I was distracted and exhausted. I seriously considered settling just to end the nightmare. But Judith strongly advised against it, saying settlement would admit wrongdoing and encourage them to come back for more. Saskia and Devon supported me through the darkest moments, proving that chosen family was stronger than blood. When mediation was attempted, it failed immediately because my parents wouldn't negotiate below $200 million, and I wouldn't pay a single dollar on principal. The night before trial, I couldn't sleep in my hotel room near the courthouse. I reviewed the entire timeline of my life, every betrayal and manipulation documented and organized. I had evidence my parents didn't know existed, one piece so damaging that Judith called it the nuclear option. I decided I'd use it if necessary, whatever it took to end this and finally be free. The trial took place in a Springfield, Massachusetts courtroom under Judge Margaret Castellano, a 58-year-old no-nonsense jurist known for her impatience with frivolous cases. The jury of 12 people represented mixed ages and backgrounds, and the public gallery was packed with media representatives sketching and taking notes. My support system was there, Saskia and Devon and Reed Cooper sitting behind my legal team. My parents' side of the courtroom held local friends and some extended family members. Finn sat alone in the neutral middle section, refusing to choose a side publicly. Preston Mallory's opening statement was charismatic and manipulative, painting my parents as the embodiment of the American dream, hard-working people who'd raised their children and retired modestly, only to be abandoned by the daughter they'd sacrificed everything for. They gave her everything, he said dramatically, and she gave them nothing. He showed carefully curated childhood photos of our supposedly happy family and emphasized their claimed financial struggles. All they want is acknowledgement and fair compensation for the years they invested in making Harper who she is today. Several jury members nodded along, clearly moved by the narrative. Judith Whitmore's opening statement was calm, factual, and powerful. This case is about greed disguised as parental love. She began. She outlined the patent theft, the manipulation, the conditional affection that defined my childhood. Parents are not investors entitled to returns, she said firmly. Harper Monroe built her fortune through her own genius and labor, and her parents contributed nothing to her adult success except attempts at exploitation. The jury's expressions shifted as Judith spoke, skepticism entering where sympathy had been moments before. My parents' first witnesses were designed to establish them as devoted caregivers. My Aunt Lorraine, Diane's sister, testified about how Diane had driven me to every piano lesson and competition, claiming she'd sacrificed her career to be a stay-at-home mom. Under cross-examination, Judith revealed that Lorraine had barely spoken to me in 10 years and didn't actually know anything about our family dynamics beyond what Diane had told her. The testimony weakened considerably. A family friend named Charlotte Brennan testified that Garrett had always been so proud of me, then claimed my parents had borrowed money for my education. Judith destroyed this with my scholarship documentation proving they'd paid nothing for my college, and Charlotte admitted she was just repeating what Diane had said without personal knowledge. Preston then called a financial expert named Dr. Miles Kendrick, who testified about the average cost of raising a child to 18, citing national figures around $230,000. He claimed my parents had exceeded this amount and deserved reasonable returns on their investment. Judith's cross-examination systematically destroyed his testimony. Are children commodities or human beings? She asked. Human beings, but, he stammered. Do parents expect returns on birthday presents? She pressed. The expert couldn't provide coherent answers about how raising a child constituted an investment contract, and competing research she presented thoroughly discredited him. When Diane took the stand, she wore a carefully chosen modest outfit designed to look like she was struggling financially. She had a tissue box prominently placed beside her. Preston's questions were designed to elicit maximum sympathy, and Diane performed beautifully, describing our supposedly close childhood relationship and claiming it'd been her best friend. She cried, describing how heartbroken she was when I chose MIT so far away. It felt like she couldn't wait to escape us. More tears came as she said she didn't care about the money. She just wanted her daughter back. This lawsuit was the only way to make her listen. Some jury members seemed genuinely moved by the performance, but Judith's cross-examination was surgical. She walked Diane through the patent theft incident step by step, forcing her to admit she'd filed a patent for my algorithm without my permission. Diane tried to call it a misunderstanding, but Judith read aloud from Diane's own journal entries obtained during discovery. Harper owes us everything she has, one entry said. Another read, we invested 18 years. Time to collect. Yet another stated, if she won't give willingly, well, take it legally. Written 8 months before the lawsuit was filed. Diane's face went pale as the jury heard her own words proving premeditation and calculation. Her attempt to claim the entries were taken out of context fell flat when Judith read several more passages showing the same themes. Garrett's testimony was even more revealing. He was less skilled at playing victim and let his bitterness show. Preston tried to get him to describe the financial sacrifices they'd made, but Garrett's language was telling. We created her, so she owes us, he said at one point, and Preston visibly winced. Parents deserve returns on their children was another phrase that made Judith smile as she took notes. Garrett grew more confident as he spoke, thinking he was making good points, not realizing he was revealing his entitled worldview with every sentence. During cross-examination, Judith confronted Garrett about their rental properties and the bank statements showing they earned $200,000 annually in rental income. That's not enough to live on, Garrett complained. It's more than the median American household income, Judith countered. We deserve better after our sacrifices, he insisted, his greed fully on display. She then forced him to walk through the patent theft in detail, making him admit they'd filed behind my back. We had rights to her ideas because we raised her and made her smart, he actually said. So you believe you own her intellectual property indefinitely because you're her parents? Judith asked. Garrett realized too late had walked into a trap and admitted they'd lost the legal case because what they did was wrong, though he still claimed they'd been treated unfairly. By the end of the second day of testimony, Judge Castellanos' expression had grown noticeably colder toward my parents. The jury seemed increasingly skeptical, Preston Mallory looked concerned, and my parents kept whispering to each other urgently. I watched all this calmly, taking notes, knowing the real evidence was still coming. The media sketched dramatic moments for the evening news. My parents' case was falling apart under scrutiny, their greed exposed, their manipulation revealed. But we weren't done yet. When Judith called me as the first defense witness, I stood and walked to the witness stand with quiet confidence. I wore a simple navy suit with no jewelry except my watch, wanting to look professional and credible rather than wealthy and untouchable. After being sworn in, I settled into the chair and made eye contact with the jury, then the judge. I deliberately avoided looking at my parents initially, not giving them the satisfaction of my attention. Judith started with my childhood, asking me to describe it in my own words. My voice was steady when I said, I was raised to be perfect. I described the constant pressure to achieve and perform, how love in our house was always conditional on accomplishment. Every A grade was celebrated, any B grade was criticized. I learned early that I was valued for what I accomplished, not who I was as a person. The jury listened intently as I explained the golden child burden, how my brother Finn could fail and still be loved while I had to be exceptional to deserve basic affection. I described keeping an achievement journal from age 10 that my parents reviewed weekly, and if I had nothing impressive to report, they showed their disappointment. Walking through my college years, I testified about the conflict over choosing MIT and my parents' anger when I asserted independence. They wanted me close to maintain control, I explained. When I chose MIT anyway despite their guilt trips, they refused to help me move and punished me with silence for making my own decision. That's when I first realized that healthy parents don't punish independence. Then came the patent theft, and this was when my voice cracked slightly with emotion for the first time. I walked through creating the algorithm, months of intensive work and breakthrough innovation. I excitedly shared it with my parents over winter break because I wanted to include them in my joy. I returned to MIT and focused on perfecting the work. Then, in March, I got a devastating call from a patent lawyer informing me that someone had filed to patent my algorithm. That someone was my parents, using information I'd shared in trust to steal my intellectual property and list me as merely a research assistant to my own work. Describing the confrontation at home was painful even years later. My mother said, "What's yours is ours, we're family." My father said, "This is payback for raising you." I let that word hang in the air, payback, so the jury could hear how my parents viewed parenthood as a transaction. That's when I knew they'd never seen me as their daughter, I testified. I was an investment that hadn't paid out yet. Several jury members looked visibly angry. I described fighting for 8 months to reclaim my own work, spending $40,000 I barely had as a college student, eating ramen for every meal to afford the legal fees. My parents never apologized after losing. Instead, they made themselves the victims and told everyone I'd attacked them by defending what was mine. Judith asked about building Sentinel, and I emphasized every single detail. Every line of code, I wrote. Every pitch to investors, I made. Every risk, I took alone. My parents contributed nothing, not money, not advice, not support, Not even encouragement. They were completely silent when I struggled. They only reappeared once I succeeded and became visible and wealthy enough to exploit. Testifying about Finn's wedding was difficult because I'd gone with hope. I wanted to believe people could change, I said. I wanted to believe family healing was possible. But the ambush at the reception revealed their true intentions, demanding $2 million and threatening to sue if I refused. 3 months later, I received papers demanding $240 million. The escalation proved this was never about need, only greed. When Judith asked what I felt receiving the lawsuit, I paused to compose myself before answering honestly. I felt grief, I said. Not for the money they wanted. Grief for the parents I never had. Grief for the little girl who tried so hard to earn love that should have been unconditional. And finally, acceptance that their love was never real. Multiple jury members were visibly moved, one wiping her eyes. I testified about the cost of the lawsuit beyond money. The 18 months of torture, the insomnia and anxiety and stress. My company performance suffered. My personal life was destroyed. My ability to trust anyone was shattered. They're suing for money, but they've already taken so much more. They took my childhood, my sense of security, my ability to believe that people can love without keeping score. Preston Mallory's cross-examination was aggressive. He tried to make my wealth sound excessive. You have nearly $500 million, correct? Approximately, yes, I confirmed. And your parents are struggling financially? He pressed. No, they're not. I replied calmly. They own multiple properties and have substantial rental income of around $200,000 per year. Preston tried a different angle. Don't you think children should help parents in need? Yes, if parents are genuinely in need and have been genuinely loving, I answered. Mine are neither. Preston tried to minimize the patent theft as a misunderstanding, but I corrected him firmly. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was theft. They deliberately filed to steal my intellectual property, and a court agreed with me. They lost because what they did was legally and morally wrong. His final attempt was emotional manipulation, asking if I loved my parents. I took a long pause before answering, letting the silence fill the courtroom. I love the parents I wish I had, I finally said. The ones who would have been proud without conditions. The ones who would have celebrated my success without demanding payment. But the people sitting over there. I gestured toward my parents. I don't know them, and I don't think I ever did. Diane sobbed loudly and Garrett looked furious, but I'd spoken my truth. On redirect examination, Judith asked one final question. If you could give them money to end this, would you? I thought carefully before responding. If I thought it would end, I'd consider it. But it won't end. Give them $2 million, they'll want 20. Give them 20, they'll want 200. Because this isn't about the money, it's about control. And I will never give them that again. The jury heard me. Really heard me. And I could see understanding in their faces. The defense called Finn Monroe to testify. And my brother walked to the stand visibly nervous, carefully avoiding our parents' eyes. Under Judith's gentle questioning, he was brutally honest about our childhood. Harper was perfect, I was mediocre, he said. She was held to impossible standards while I was allowed to coast. They loved me unconditionally and her conditionally. He described specific incidents. Harper grounded for an A- while I got allowance money despite failing classes. Her achievements dismissed while my participation trophies were celebrated. Her paying for college while they still gave me money at 31. When Judith asked if he'd known our parents planned to ambush me at his wedding, Finn's voice shook. No. I invited her because I missed her. I found out later they'd used my wedding as a trap. He looked directly at our parents and said, "I'll never forgive you for that. You've destroyed our family." After testifying that I didn't owe them anything and this lawsuit was embarrassing and wrong, Finn stepped down and sat on my side of the courtroom. A symbolic moment that wasn't lost on anyone. Reed Cooper, the private investigator, presented his financial findings methodically. My parents claimed poverty, but actually owned properties worth $1.2 million combined and earned $200,000 annually in rental income, plus had retirement accounts totaling $450,000. They were comfortable, not struggling. The lawsuit was motivated by pure greed, not genuine need. Then Reed presented the email trail, showing they'd consulted 5 lawyers before finding Preston. With most refusing the case as frivolous, the emails between Diane and Garrett were damning. Even if we get 10%, that's $40 million. Garrett had written. Diane responded. We deserve 50%, we made her. These cold calculations proved zero genuine parental love, only financial scheming. Jury members looked disgusted. Then Judith stood and addressed Judge Castellano. Your Honor, we have one final piece of evidence. It's sensitive and involves documentation from when Harper was a minor, but it's crucial to understanding the plaintiff's true character. Preston objected immediately that this was prejudicial, but Judge Castellano allowed it with a warning to proceed carefully. I looked nervous because this was the dangerous nuclear evidence, but Judith nodded at me reassuringly. The documents Judith presented were certified medical and school records from my childhood. At age 14, it had a hospital visit for malnutrition. There were school counselor notes expressing concerns about emotional abuse. A child services report showed they'd investigated our family but closed the case because my parents were charming in interviews and I'd been too intimidated to tell the truth. At 16, I'd seen a private therapist whose notes, which I'd given permission to release, documented emotional manipulation, conditional love, and psychological harm. The most damaging document was an email Diane had sent to a friend when I was 17, discussing my MIT scholarship. She'd written, "She's going to be rich someday. We need to make sure we benefit from our investment. She owes us and we'll make sure she pays." This email was dated 7 years before my company even existed, proving my parents had always viewed me as a future income source, not as their daughter but as an asset to exploit. The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers. Diane tried to stand and protest, "That's not what I meant," but Garrett pulled her back down. Preston looked defeated. Several jury members were shaking their heads in open disgust. Judge Castellano asked if my parents wanted to testify again, and despite Preston's advice against it, Garrett insisted on taking the stand. It was a catastrophic decision. Emotional and defensive, he tried to justify himself when Judith showed him another email had sent Diane 3 weeks before filing the lawsuit. Harper's worth $500 million. We deserve at least half. She wouldn't exist without us. Time to collect our investment. Garrett's voice rose as he tried to defend himself. We gave her life. Everything she has is because of us. Children owe their parents. His face turned red as he lost control. She should be grateful we're only asking for $240 million. Judge Castellano told him to control himself, but Garrett continued, "We made her. We own her success." The courtroom gasped. Preston tried to intervene, but the damage was done. Judge Castellano ordered Garrett to step down and called a 15-minute recess, her fury obvious. Preston's closing argument was brief and defeated. "Despite everything, they're still her parents," he said weakly. "Family obligations exist. Some compensation seems reasonable." He asked for a reduced amount of $10 million as a token acknowledgement, but even he sounded unconvinced. The jury looked unmoved by his half-hearted plea. Judith's closing argument was powerful. This case is about greed dressed as parental love. The evidence shows a lifetime of manipulation by parents who saw their daughter as an investment and calculated returns before she even graduated high school. They stole her intellectual property, waited until she was wealthy to demand payment, and filed this exploitative lawsuit. This is not a family dispute, this is exploitation. She addressed the jury directly. The law is clear. Parents have an obligation to raise their children, but children have no legal obligation to enrich their parents. If you rule for the plaintiffs, you set a precedent that every successful person owes their parents a fortune, that children are investments rather than human beings. Harper owes them nothing. She deserves her freedom. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes, remarkably quick for such a complex case. When we were recalled to the courtroom, my heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. The jury foreman, a woman in her mid-50s, stood and announced, "In the matter of Monroe versus Monroe, we find in favor of the defendant Harper Monroe on all counts." The courtroom erupted. I collapsed into Judith's arms as relief flooded through me. Diane screamed no, and Garrett stormed out. Judge Castellano hammered her gavel demanding order. Then Judge Castellano made her own statement. "I've been on the bench for 23 years, and this is one of the most frivolous cases I've seen. Your behavior toward your daughter is reprehensible. Not only is the verdict against you, but I'm awarding Miss Monroe all attorney's fees. You'll pay her legal costs of approximately $750,000. Furthermore, I'm sanctioning your attorney Preston Mallory with a $50,000 fine for bringing this case. And I'm ordering you," she looked directly at my parents, "to have no contact with Harper Monroe unless she initiates it. Any violation will result in contempt charges. This court is adjourned." Outside the courthouse, I gave a brief statement to the media. "I hope this case shows that children are not commodities. Parents don't own their children's futures. I'm free now, and that's priceless." Then I got into the car with Judith and drove away from that courthouse, from that town, from that chapter of my life. Finally free. 6 months after the verdict, I finally understood what freedom actually felt like. I took my first real vacation in 7 years, staying at a friend's beach house in Northern California where I could hear the ocean and feel the sun and just breathe without the constant weight of legal proceedings crushing me. I cried a lot during that month, processed years of accumulated trauma, and slept more than I had in a decade. My therapy sessions increased to 3 times per week as Dr. Chen helped me unpack not just the lawsuit but the decades of manipulation that preceded it. I grieved properly for the first time. Not for the parents I'd lost but for the parents I'd never had. The ones who would have loved me without conditions or calculations. The media attention from the case created unexpected ripples. My story resonated with thousands of people who reached out to share their own experiences with toxic families. The messages said things like, "Your courage helped me set boundaries with my own parents," or "Thank you for fighting because now I know I'm not crazy for cutting off contact." I realized my pain had served a purpose beyond my own healing. The case sparked national conversations about parental entitlement, about when it's okay to walk away from family, about how children aren't investments or retirement plans. Think pieces appeared in major publications, and suddenly people were talking openly about family dysfunction in ways they hadn't before. My relationship with Finn slowly rebuilt during these months. He visited me several times, and we had long conversations about our shared childhood, both of us in therapy and both finally seeing the dysfunction clearly. Finn admitted he'd been guilty by staying silent, by enabling our parents through his passivity. I told him we were both victims of different types of cages, and neither of us was responsible for our parents' choices. We started having weekly phone calls that gradually became something I looked forward to rather than dreaded. His wife Colette was supportive and kind, welcoming me into their lives without judgment or expectation. I was learning that family could be redefined, that blood doesn't determine who belongs in your life. My parents were forced to sell one of their rental properties to pay the $750,000 judgment for my legal fees. Their reputation in our hometown was destroyed as people learned the truth about what they'd done. Friends distanced themselves, and extended family mostly sided with me. My Aunt Lorraine apologized for testifying for them, saying she'd been fooled by Diane's lies and manipulation. My parents became increasingly isolated, a natural consequence of their greed and exploitation. Despite the court order prohibiting contact, Diane tried sending a letter through a friend. She still didn't apologize, instead playing victim and saying, "We're your parents, You should forgive us. I didn't respond but sent the letter to my lawyer as evidence of violation. They received a warning that the next violation would mean jail time, and they finally stopped trying. When I returned to work at Sentinel, it was with renewed purpose and energy. The company was stronger than ever, our stock price had recovered and exceeded its previous high, and I promoted Saskia to Chief Operating Officer and Devon to Chief Technology Officer. I built a leadership team based on trust and genuine merit rather than exploitation or manipulation. We implemented company policies emphasizing healthy work-life balance, and I made sure everyone knew this wasn't just policy, but actual practice. My own workaholism had been partially about avoiding emotional pain, and as I healed, I modeled better boundaries for my entire company. The philanthropic work I dreamed about became reality when I established the Chosen Family Fund with a $50 million endowment. The foundation supported young people escaping toxic families, providing scholarships for students estranged from their parents, legal aid for those fighting familial exploitation, and therapy grants for trauma recovery. Our motto was simple: no one should have to choose between safety and survival. The first year, we awarded full scholarships to 22 students, each with a story painfully similar to mine. I met every recipient personally and told them something I wished someone had told me: your worth isn't measured by your achievements. You deserve love without conditions. Several recipients cried meeting me, feeling seen and validated and supported in ways their own families had never provided. I began accepting speaking invitations at tech conferences initially, then expanding to events focused on family dynamics and mental health. My TEDx talk titled "The Difference Between Family and Relatives" went viral with over 40 million views. The core message resonated deeply. Blood doesn't obligate you to accept abuse. Chosen family is valid and valuable. And sometimes the healthiest choice is walking away. I received standing ovations everywhere I spoke, and the feedback confirmed that millions of people needed permission to prioritize their own well-being over familial obligation. My personal life, dormant for so many years, finally began to bloom. I met a man named Elliot at a charity event, a 36-year-old architect with kind eyes and genuine warmth. We took things slowly because my trust issues didn't disappear overnight. But Elliot was patient and understanding about my history. "I'm not going anywhere," he'd say. "Take all the time you need." It was the first healthy relationship I'd ever experienced, and I was learning what real partnership looked like: support without conditions, love without scorekeeping, commitment without manipulation. In therapy, Dr. Chen helped me identify patterns I'd developed as survival mechanisms. My perfectionism was rooted in seeking parental approval that would never come. My workaholism was avoiding emotional pain through constant distraction. My difficulty accepting help stemmed from having to be completely self-sufficient from a young age. I worked on all of these patterns consciously and deliberately. I learned to be good enough instead of perfect, to rest without guilt, to accept love without feeling like I had to earn it. The work was hard but transformative. I rediscovered parts of myself that had been buried under years of trauma and stress. I took up painting and was terrible at it but didn't care because it wasn't about achievement. I joined a recreational volleyball league where losing was fun rather than devastating. I adopted a rescue dog I named Justice because the irony felt appropriate and he gave unconditional love in ways my parents never had. I learned to cook actual meals beyond ramen. I read fiction for pleasure instead of only business books. These simple pleasures felt revolutionary. 9 months after the trial, a certified letter arrived from Garrett, not Diane. I almost threw it away without opening it, but curiosity won. The 4-page handwritten letter started defensive but gradually shifted tone. Garrett admitted he was wrong. "I let greed consume me. I treated you like an asset, not a person. I failed as a father." He explained that he and Diane were divorcing because she couldn't let go of her bitterness while he was trying to become a better person. He was in therapy, confronting his narcissism, trying to understand the damage he'd caused. I don't expect forgiveness, he wrote. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that you were right, and am sorry. The letter ended with, "I'm proud of you." And I should have said that freely years ago. I didn't respond immediately. I discussed the letter with Dr. Chen over several sessions, working through my complicated feelings. Eventually, I decided that acknowledgement doesn't require reconciliation. I wrote a brief reply thanking him for the apology, saying I hoped he found peace, but I wasn't ready for contact and might never be. Either way, I told him, I'm okay. Sending that letter brought unexpected relief. I realized I wasn't angry anymore, just free. His apology didn't change the past, but it released me from wondering if they'd ever see the truth. 1 year after the verdict, I threw a party to celebrate not the legal victory, but the family ID built. 30 people came to my home. Saskia and Devon and Finn, and Colette and Elliot, Dr. Chen and Reed Cooper and Judith Whitmore, college friends and colleagues who'd become chosen family. These people loved me unconditionally, without manipulation or expectations or scorekeeping. Standing in my living room surrounded by laughter and genuine warmth, I realized ID finally built what ID always wanted. Not wealth, though I had that, but belonging and acceptance and real love. I gave a toast that captured everything I'd learned. To everyone here, thank you for choosing me. In a world that says blood is everything, you showed me that chosen family is stronger. My parents demanded my fortune in court, but you all gave me something priceless, the freedom to be myself. Thank you. My dog Justice sat at my feet. Elliot held my hand. Finn and Colette announced they were expecting their first baby. Saskia shared that she was engaged. Life was moving forward. Not perfect but real. Not without pain but full of healing. I sometimes still wondered about my mother. Diane never apologized and probably never would. I'd accepted this because some people are incapable of change, too invested in their own narratives to see the damage they cause. I couldn't make them love me the right way, but I could surround myself with people who already did. The court case won my legal freedom. Therapy and time won my emotional freedom. Now I was just free, and that felt miraculous. 2 years after the trial, I published a memoir titled Invested that told my complete story. It became an instant bestseller and was selected for Oprah's book club. The book helped millions of people recognize toxic family patterns in their own lives and gave them permission to set boundaries or walk away. All proceeds went to the Chosen Family Fund, multiplying our impact far beyond what ID imagined possible. The dedication was simple. To everyone still fighting for their freedom, you're worth it. To everyone who's already free, never go back. And to my chosen family, thank you for showing me what love actually looks like. 3 years post-trial, a journalist asked if I regretted fighting rather than settling. I answered without hesitation, not for a second. That trial wasn't about money. It was about declaring that I am not for sale. I'm not an investment or a commodity or a retirement plan. I'm a person. And I'm finally free. That freedom is worth more than any amount of money they could have taken. It's worth everything. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who treated you as an obligation rather than a person? What would you do if you were in my position? Drop your thoughts in the comments because I read every single one and your stories matter. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more real stories about overcoming impossible situations. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone in struggling with family expectations. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it helps you know that freedom is possible, healing is real, and chosen family can be stronger than blood. Remember that your worth isn't determined by what you achieve or what you can provide to others. You deserve love without conditions. Take care of yourselves, set those boundaries, and never apologize for protecting your peace. Until next time, stay strong and stay free.